Hello, Charlie TCG here, and welcome back to my channel. Just want to start by saying thank you so much for the huge support on my introduction to retro series last week. Truly means so much to me that you guys are really fascinated and want to know about the old sort of formats and cards which dominated the meta. And I thought, why not start off with Worlds 2010, 13 years ago, and still talked about wildly today as some people's favorite format of all time, with a huge amount of different array of decks that they could build from that. So in these videos, I'm going to break down exactly what sets were legal and sort of looking into the tournaments that happened, the regionals, the nationals, the worlds, the internationals when we get to it, see exactly what decks were dominating in that sort of era, and obviously talking about the key sort of archetypes around that time and the cards which really made this format special. And this can hopefully in time kind of build up your collection, your knowledge to understand about if you want to build this sort of format or just a good insight to know what happened in Pokemon 13 years ago. So we just look at what was legal during Worlds 2010, we can see there's a huge amount of card pool, from Diamond and Pearl all the way to Heart Gold Unleashed. This is one of the longest time a set has ever been legal, with Diamond and Pearl, I believe, being the longest set legal, which was legal in 4 World Championships from all the way starting in 2007 till 2010, which is incredible, the huge amount of dominance this set sort of had to offer. And there was, because of this, there was so many more new gimmicks got added. In Platinum, we obviously got an introduction to SP, and Heart Gold Silver, we had the introduction to Primes, and obviously the Legend pieces. So there are loads of different mechanics which kind of go around in this format, which was really exciting to see. And because of that, there were so many different more archetypes that kind of go around, and some decks became a lot more dominant into this one. But during this time, there was actually very little tournaments that did happen. There was only the high caliber ones, like obviously Worlds 2010 and Nationals, which was back kind of like the internationals back in the day, where every country had this huge big tournament where you had to earn a certain amount of play points to actually qualify to these nationals. And it was obviously you battle out to be the best player in your country. This was a huge sort of ordeal, and a lot of players still to this day have played in nationals before, which was really exciting to see that there's still this huge amount of game around with it. But because of it was very limited sort of card pool, I decided to look at some regionals. Literally this happened about a month or so beforehand. It happened in America. This was all thanks to Pokemon Trading Card Game Archive, and all the links or the resources I've used are down below, and I would highly recommend checking out every single one of them to understand a bit more further about sort of what have been played and the placements. So if we just look all the way from Diamond and Pearl to Heart Gold Silver, just before this one, we can see that Luxray Gardevoir in the regionals absolutely dominated by his 7 places. Luxray GL with the power to bright look when you level up into it on the act, and when it's in the active spot, kind of using likes of Umbreon VMAX and the likes of Lycanroc GX, dusting out one of the opponent's bench because the active is obviously very, very strong. And with Garchomp, see healing capability with Healing Breath, and huge amount of damage you can do with Dragon Rush, doing 80 damage to any one of your opponent's Pokemon is really, really powerful if you discard 2 energies. Now, obviously, we're looking back in the day where we're saying 80 damage. We are right now in this format, we're looking at Cramorant does 110. This can KO Luxray and Garchomp. But back in the day, 80 damage is a lot of damage for Pokemon. We didn't do these big one-hit KOs every single now and then. So I quite like it had this big capability. And we can see this in the other sort of decks here, where we're seeing like Gyarados, which does more damage for the amount of magic ups in your discard pile for no energy. Jumpluff, which you can evolve up to it very quickly with the likes of a Stadium card, Broken Time Space, all of this stuff I will discuss later on in this video, doing like 10 times the amount of Pokemon both you and your opponent have in play, and other sort of locking sort of decks like the big like Sableye lock, and obviously Shuppet, which is a big donking sort of deck trying to do this big damage because you can attack on your first sort of turn. So it's sort of a really interesting sort of thing to see how dominated some decks really did become. We had obviously the likes of these fun ones like Jumpluff and Gyarados I always find, but these big sort of decks like Dialga Garchomp and Luxray Garchomp, these big powerhouse level X sort of archetypes, which really did dominate regionals. And if we just look at nationals, we can see here still Luxray and Garchomp are back there on top, like winning 10 of the currently recorded nationals in this sort of era, and Jumpluff also won 2. So I quite like to see that we did see some sort of variety of other sort of ones, but we mainly are seeing this LuxChomp domination that's happened during nationals, and this can even be replaced. If we just look at the US nationals here, we can see LuxChomp dominated by being nearly 35% of the meta, and the rest of it being very much slower, sort of smaller sort of percentage wise here. Whereas Jumpluff, one of my favorite archetypes, being 8%, Gardevoir and like Sableye block, kind of rounding out to be about the 60% of the meta. You can see here there's a load of different more varieties that kind of go around there, but we're seeing this big like inclusion of LuxChomp sort of really be powerhouse. So I thought I'd break down exactly what each of these cards sort of did with looking at the lists, which happened during the time of the nationals as well as the regionals that kind of just happen around here, kind of talking to exactly why some of these big archetypes that exist around here. We can see here we do play quite a thin sort of line of the Garchomp and the Luxray because of this really powerful card here called Poketurn, which is a really good item card, which you get to return one of your Pokemon SP from your bench or from anywhere and play it into the active spot. This is a way for you to constantly reuse Luxray GX, GL level X. So you're constantly using that gusty sort of effect, which is really, really powerful. And you have other sort of good sort of draw sort of factors in the likes of Yuxi, which is setup. Yes, setup ability, but when you get to play it down, you drop to you have 7, which is really, really powerful. And you have these Azov, which is this really good time walk sort of ability, where you get to look at your prize cards and put them down in any order. Very, very powerful to understand exactly where your prizes are back in the day, where we didn't really have any of the likes of like Town Map or Guardian or stuff like that. So it's good to understand that. Another sort of really powerful one is obviously like Crobat GX, G, which allows you to Fast Bite, I believe, Flash Bite, where you get to put down a bench and snipe one of your opponent's Pokemon by doing 10 damage. We've seen the likes of this since the very first like Dark Crobat to obviously we saw back in Phantom Forces. Crobat's always had this sort of sneaky sort of bite with it. And like I said, with Poketurn, constantly reusing that is really, really powerful. And we still have, because of its sort of energy, this thing called Cool Energy, which is very, very powerful. Think of it like Capture Energy, which we had just recently, and it got rotated. Well, Cool Energy, you get to attach it, but it's not you get to play it whenever. And what it is you get to search your deck for 2 basic Pokemon and put them onto your bench. But if you do that, your turn ends. Very, very cool sort of ability with that as an energy card, but that's not, you're limited to only once. You get to do that whenever. So having a higher count of it guarantees you can set up your board as quickly as possible and other attacks like your Ambipom, your Lucario, and obviously that big notorious Toxicroak GL. And also really powerful cards like Luxury Ball, which lets you search your deck for any Pokemon you want except level X. But they have a catch. If you have a Luxury Ball in your discard pile, you can't play it. Really, really nice sort of effect with this, guarantee getting that search. And other sort of things here like Judge, which is a big, powerful card by then with a big disruptive ability on the opponent, because in this format really sort of lacked with that. And this is a good sort of basic list to understand exactly what a LuxChomp deck worked with. And some people did obviously change around with it. Having likes of Domfam, where you could deal some more sort of damage along there, constantly sort of go out with Earthquake doing 60 damage for a basic. And this is really good because you get to get those one-hit KOs return on a Garchomp. No, sorry, you don't. It is a colorless weakness. Back then, dragons were obviously colorless. I forget. And you have obviously some other sort of cool sort of support sort of Pokemon like Mesprit, which allows Pokemon not to play any Pokebodies during your next turn. And this one here focuses more on Super Scoop Up and Poketurn. So constantly try and reuse the amazing power of Crobat and Luxray GL to do as much damage as possible. And in this one, Donphan does in fact damage the bench, so it's a good healing sort of factor around that. We also have like a really good draw factor, Claydol, which you get to put 2 cards from your hand, put at the bottom of your deck, and I believe you draw until you have 6. Very, very powerful. And this, of course, did get reprinted in the Celebrations of era. This one also has introduced us to the first time looking at Broken Time Space, where each player get to evolve up to their Pokemon as quickly as they like, and ignoring the effects of the on play and the first turn rule. Really, really exciting to see this sort of capability that really happened around in that one. Another one, we had this Blaziken, which performed pretty well overall. Blaziken doing a lot more damage on there, having that fighting fire weakness, and having Expert Belt, which lets you attach to one of your Pokemon, and the attacks do 10 more damage, and you believe you do get a few more HP, but you have a caveat: the opponent takes 1 extra prize card if they get it, you're knocked out. Now, this was pretty sort of powerful in that sort of archetype, doing that more damage, but having the 2 prizes sort of effect was really, really powerful in a sort of format, because they didn't really get that, and it's always going to be 1 prizes. So because of that, I want to break down exactly some of the core cards that made up Luxray and Garchomp sort of deck. Now, I told you about the bright look with Luxray GL, but it does have a cool sort of attack for lightning and a colorless, 60 damage and 30 damage to one of your Pokemon. This can team up by putting down to Crobat MG, and then you get to bring it up with Poketurn is really powerful, and I've talked to you about exactly why Garchomp C is really powerful, the amount of healing this deck has to offer, and obviously the amount of doing 80 damage to anything on the board is really powerful, because looking at the likes of Lucario, that gets KO'd and has a really good ability where each weakness on both your Pokemon and your opponent have 2 times instead. Now, why is this important? Well, back then, weaknesses was plus 30, and only having ×2 on the special Pokemon like the SP, and then eventually in Heart Gold Silver Silver, it stayed on to the ×2 of what we're always known with. So having the guaranteed everything has this ×2 is really good, because you can get the use Luxray GL to get the KO on the likes of Gyarados around there. And the attack, I don't believe you really use it for that. I think you mainly use that for the ×2 sort of ability, but a 30 damage plus 10 more for each energy attached to the defending Pokemon. Not exactly powerful, but a big powerful card in this list is that Crobat G, that Flash Bite, where you get to put it on the bench and you put 1 damage counter on one of your opponent's Pokemon. Teaming up with obviously the Poketurn, and you're constantly doing an additional maybe 2 to 3 sort of extra sort of ones with that, with your 2 Crobats, doing a little more sniping capability with the likes of Garchomp C. See, you could get the 2 price turn, which is really, really powerful. And the other sort of really key sort of insights to this list was that Cyrus Conspiracy, which I love for your main supporter. You may did play around 4 of these, because you have to search your deck for a supporter card, a basic energy, and a trainer card that has Team Galactic's invention in it. And all of these down below are very powerful item cards, which watch for it. Power Spray, one of the only cards that ever existed in where you get to interact with your opponent's turn. And you got to it was kind of like you play an ability and you have to wait to see if your opponent's going to play a Power Spray. Now, there's a caveat. You can only play this if you have 3 or more Pokemon with SP out in play. But if you do play that, your opponent can't use a Pokepower if they announce it. So they announce the Pokepower, and then you play Power Spray to see if that then that kind of counteracts it. That counteracts the Garchomp's healing. That counteracts the Luxray GL's gusting effect. That maybe counteract the Crobat's Flash Bite. So counteracting and affecting on the opponent's side was one of the most best things in this sort of format. We also had Energy Gain, which as long as attached to a Pokemon which is SP on it, the attacks do 1 less. So also in Garchomp is now doing for just double colorless, which is really, really powerful. Luxray is now just 1 light energy. And I've talked obviously about Poketurn, getting the return one of your Pokemon SP and all cards attached to your hand. Really powerful. And it's exactly why LuxChomp really performed incredibly well during this era. The sheer capability of it doing less damage and potentially stopping an opponent playing any of their abilities, that's what Pokepower were back in the day, was really, really powerful. So if we just look now at Worlds 2010, it consists of 115 players with a top 16 cut, and it was in Hawaii. And if we just look at the sort of the meta here, we can see here that LuxChomp very much dominated here again by being 38% of the meta on that day, sort of the top 32, which is really, really powerful. And Dialga performed pretty well as well. So if you team them up with it, Garchomp was nearly 50% of them, with over 40% of the meta, which is really, really strong. Gardevoir as well was really powerful, which I will talk to you in just a little second. And if we just look at the results from this Worlds, we can see here that obviously Luxray Garchomp did in fact win, which had the likes of Dialga in it. Second place was Michael Pramarot, who got there with Gardevoir Gallet, and top 4 had another LuxChomp plus CursedGar, which is a really cool deck, which we'll be discussing very, very shortly. And the other top 8 consists of 2 more LuxChomp, a Gyarados deck, which is really cool, and another Gardevoir Gallet. Really nice to see there was a little bit of diversity, but we're seeing here 4 of the top 8 were LuxChomp. That kind of shows that this deck was dominating. Even though people talk about the format, people love it, there was a clear, consistent BTIF. This is the best sort of deck here, and it was here to stay, and it really did dominate this sort of Worlds. And still to this day, one of the strongest archetypes that has existed, I believe. So if we just look at the winning list here, we can see here that it has got the classic Luxray and Garchomp sort of engine in there. It does have that the Crobat, does have the Lucario, does have the Luxray and the Azelf, but it has the Warp Energy, which is like a free switching out. It plays a higher count of the energy gain because it works well with Dialga. Dialga is a really cool sort of ability, and it has a really good strong sort of attack where it lets your opponent not play any trainer cards, which is really, really powerful in this sort of a meta, potentially getting us out by turn 1 because of energy gain. Also really powerful archives that utilize some other supporters, collectors. You can get any of your basic Pokemon out in play, get them to your hand. And obviously Professor Oak's new theory, which is the shuffle card. Back then, Shuffle Draw 6 was incredibly powerful, and it still was when we had obviously Cynthia. And then it plays the classic high counts of Pokestop, Pokepower, and Energy Gain, and the likes of SP Radar, which you get to search your deck for an SP Pokemon, which is really, really cool in this sort of format going around here. So I really like the capability that LuxChomp really had to offer. But I want to talk to you about Gardevoir. Gardevoir had a really powerful GX sort of ability and attack. No, level X, sorry. Always get used to it. We've always had X at the end of stuff. We've had EX, we've had GX. Now we've gone back to EX, and now obviously here we had level X. So it had the really cool sort of telepath where you get to search your deck for, I believe, a supporter. I just want to double check because there's so much of managed in there. But it had an attack where the attack does 60, but the opponent can't play any their Pokepower locked. So you're constantly locking the opponent out, which is really, really strong. And we team up the likes of the Dusknoir with the Dark Palm, which is really good that if your opponent has 4 or more Pokemon out in play, you get to use this ability and you get to shuffle one of them into their deck, which is really, really powerful to stop your opponent from getting their big setup as much as possible. And this obviously has other sort of likes. It has Expert Bell, it has the Rare Candy, which is very rare to see, obviously, Rare Candy, but back then it was still very, very popular. And other sort of really important sort of cards like Bebe Search to search your deck, obviously, for a Pokemon. It's sort of like computer search back in the day. Night Magic Maintenance is Super Rod. Warp Point was Escape Rope. So we've seen a lot more common cards than we've seen in the format around here, but seeing the likes of Spiritomb, which is a way to lock out the opponent from utilizing any of their really key sort of archetypes around there. So that's a really powerful sort of option that has been around in here. And obviously CursedGar is a deck which you've probably heard about it quite a lot because it teams around with Gengar's Curse and obviously the evolving into level X. CursedGar is a way to properly really lock out your opponent with the likes of Spiritomb, which lets, when it's in play, that players can't play any, I believe, any trainer cards, which obviously back then were item cards, and the attack for no energy, you get to search your deck to evolve any of your Pokemon. And the likes of Gengar level X and Gengar, you get to put some damage on the opponent's Pokemon to really set up there, but you can use the other sort of abilities around Gengar to really send up their Pokemon back into their hands, and having Gengar level X to do some more damage around there by putting around the board so they really get those big one-hit KOs and constantly be getting out. And the opponent can't really get a setup, and getting those KOs through them, never really be able to evolve into the Pokemon they may want to have. And again, does play the Dusknoir to stop the opponent from ever building up that big sort of setup ability. I really like sort of CursedGar. It's a very expensive deck, if I'm honest, to really try and get it around, but it's quite sort of interesting. Obviously, the Faded Spell ability of Gengar. There's so much around here to constantly try and lock out the opponent from ever sort of playing and getting any of her big sort of board state around. Another really interesting archetype around this sort of format was Gyarados. Gyarados has the ability where 30 damage times the amount of magic up you do have in your discard pile, but because of that, you're constantly having to use Pokemon Rescue to get out your Gyarados magic ups to constantly be attacking. But if you do that, it does for no energy. So having 130 HP is really good. You chuck an Expert Belt in there, you're having 160 HP, doing 10 more damage, which is a lot of damage to your opponent's Pokemon. And we have the likes of Crobat G, Poketurn, and Luxray GL, so you're constantly being able to snipe out some damage and gust out anything your opponent may need to have. Sableye is a really good lock sort of Pokemon to have in there, and it really helps your setup against supporters you might need to have. Felicity's Drawing allows you to do your more discarding effects with get rid of your magic ups and allows you to draw into it, which is really, really good when you have the likes of Regice and the Azelf and Mesprit and Uxie to really try and slow down the opponent and understand what your prizes are and draw into it. This is when Broken Time Space is really well broken in this sort of deck. By attaching it onto it, you can immediately evolve into your Gyarados and potentially get that attacking out turn 1 by having 100 plus HP already. It's really, really powerful. And continuous big damage, which I absolutely love in this sort of list. And the Warp Energy to get extra sort of switching out there. Think of it like Jet Energy. I really love this sort of archetype for Gyarados. It did do pretty well, obviously. So it did win a couple of nationals, did win a couple of regionals. Again, a top 8 finish was really, really strong for it. And to finish off, I want to talk to you about Jumpluff, my favorite archetype in this sort of format, with that big mass attack, which does 10 times the amount of Pokemon both you and your opponent have in play. So it's really good you're constantly getting into the trying to constantly get this build this big board out. And you have the likes of Crobat G, Plus Power, and obviously Poketurn. I don't believe this has actually played Poketurn, but you're constantly trying to get out as big amount of damage as much as possible. The likes of Expert Belt and even Broken Time Space. Try and get out that big turn, like one attack, because obviously in this format, you could attack going first. It's really, really powerful. This listed, in fact, to win, I believe, the juniors division. If I was honest, this is very different to how I might play it. You can have the likes of Luxray. There's so much to go around here, but Claydol is a really good draw support, and obviously Night Maintenance. And I just love Pokepower to get that big one-hit KO. This deck is really, really interesting, really, really fun. So yeah, I absolutely love it. So this is why people love it. They love the long games. They love the multiple different decks to choose from, the different range of skill, and mainly they're all single prize Pokemon. And that's why I think this format absolutely does incredibly well. Having single prize Pokemon is really, really good in this sort of format. You're not going big the one-hit KO and potentially winning 2 to 3 turns. You're winning potentially the minimum like 6 turns potentially, but you're going a lot longer because you take a lot longer to set up. You're evolving your Pokemon. That's why I think this format is absolutely so important to really go back to and reflect on, because of that huge capability it had in this sort of the meta. If we just, like I said, we're looking more in detail to these key sort of cards here. So we can see here with Gardevoir, the telepath of ability, where you get to use a discard supporter from a discard pile and use that as your effect from your opponent's deck, which is really good to get to potentially have 2 supporters for the turn. Obviously, Psychic Lock, your opponent can't play any Pokepowers on his or her turn. Back then it said that. Obviously now we know it is your opponent and their sort of turn. And then obviously Jumpluff, that big mass effect. Free Retreat does 10 times the amount of Pokemon you have in play. And obviously that Tail Revenge of Gyarados, 30 times the amount of Magic Card being on discard pile. Doing 90, you're basically 2-shot in everything, but your likes of Pokepower and obviously Crobat, and you're doing a load, and the Expert Belt, you're doing a lot more damage consistently to get those big one-hit KOs every time. And obviously I just talked about Gengar, that curse ability, where you get to move one damage counters around your opponent and once during your turn, which is really powerful. And the Shadow Skip, doing 10 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. Not too bad, but when you level up to Gengar level X near the end, a level down ability lets you choose one of your opponent's level X and remove that level up from that Pokemon. And this power can't be used, obviously it's under special condition, but potentially getting rid of that and kind of like slowing them down a bit with using Compound Pain, doing 30 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon that already has damage counters on that. Gengar lets you spread it around there, and Compound Pain lets you put 30 damage around the whole of your board state. Really powerful to see this Gengar sort of it's a very slow build up sort of deck, which really does pay off near the end. And also, like I said, the key sort of cards away, which were around there, were these collectors, Expert Belt, Cool Energy, and Broken Time Space. Really, really powerful. Sorry, that's 20 HP and 20 more damage. I apologize for making any of those mistakes earlier. Broken Time Space, they evolve Pokemon when they played it or evolved during their turn. Obviously, Cool Energy is a once during your turn. You get to search your deck for, if it's in the active place, you get to search your deck for 2 basic Pokemon, put them on your bench, and Collector lets you search for 3 basic Pokemon. Think of it like Pokemon Fan Club, more recent sort of era. So these are some of the key cards that really helped shape up this sort of the meta, the ones which still are talked about today. And I really hope this video has been quite helpful for you. Hope it's made you understand a bit more about what happened during this sort of era, the key cards, the key decks, and kind of the results. We really did see, looking at this, LuxChomp was the most dominating deck, winning more regionals, more nationals, and obviously the world championship. So LuxChomp is definitely up there to be one of the strongest archetypes in their meta. But you have these other fun sort of stage 1 and stage 2 decks, which don't really see in some formats until more recently, I believe. The likes of Gyarados, Gardevoir, and Jumpluff, and even Gengar as well. Potentially some of them being like a stage 3 because you're leveling up into them. Doing a huge amount of damage and potentially locking your opponent out was a really key sort of impact in this sort of format. So I hope this has helped understand exactly what decks you potentially could build. My top picks are definitely going to be LuxChomp, but also Jumpluff. I think these are the best and really fun sort of archetypes to kind of play around with. But if you want to go the more sort of expensive route like Gardevoir and CursedGar, definitely want to potentially budget before you really try and like spend the cash or potentially proxy them out beforehand. So I hope you have enjoyed this video. Next week, I'm going to break down the Sun and Moon to Lost Thunder, the more modern sort of everyone's favorite current new format. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, be sure to like, subscribe, and comment down below. What format do you want me to try out? Is there one I potentially you absolutely love about or just want to know about? Just comment down below and I will see my best to cover it. I will see you guys in a few days for another video. See you around. Bye for now.